In Psalm 63, we've been dwelling in it as a church, and we're going to spend some more time there in our few remaining minutes this morning. David says this, God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. Earnestly I seek you. Everybody say the word earnestly. Do we earnestly seek God? I got to tell you, for the first 15 minutes of our worship service this morning, I was thinking, I don't think our church is earnestly seeking God today. I think we've got all sorts of other concerns, and thank you, because I think we've seen it shift over the morning, and I appreciate that. So I'm not beating you up, but here's the thing. In Psalm 63, David begins by expressing for us his current reality. And he's not doing it on the best day of his life in great circumstances. He's doing it on the worst day of his life in very difficult circumstances. But his reality is, God, you are my God. My challenges are not my God. My wilderness is not my God. My regret is not my God. My grief is not my God. My stuff is not my God. Well, he's lucky because he's just lost all of his stuff. My kingdom is not my God. Well, he's lucky because he just lost all of his kingdom. My palace is not my God. Well, he's lucky because he just lost his palace. And he's in the wilderness where he's fled for his life, but he is given rehab in the wilderness where he returns to the deepest reality of his life. God, you are my God. And what does he say about this God? He says, earnestly I seek you. Earnestly, earnestly, earnestly. Whenever I read the Bible, one of the games I like to play is I like to find antonyms for the word and put them in there and see if it works. How many language buffs are in the house? What is an antonym? Come on, where's some of the school teachers? Or their home marking papers? It's the opposite, isn't it, Mary? Thank you. And David. It's an opposite. Earnestly I seek you. Let's put a couple of antonyms in there and see how God's word sits with us. Oh God, you are my God. Half-heartedly I seek you. Oh God, you are my God. A little bit I seek you. Oh God, you are my God. I seek you about the same as I consider whether I buy the new Apple Watch. Earnestly. Earnestly. Everybody say earnestly. Have you ever done anything earnestly before? Earnestly. My children have lived in a house, unfortunately for them, where we decided from a young age that if we buy them their iPad, it's always going to get broken. And if we buy them a gizmo, it's always going to get broken. So that's one problem. The second one was, I didn't really want them to have one, to be honest, because I've seen all the literature on mental health and children with social media and digital screen time and all that sort of stuff. So I was kind of keen for them to go a lot of years without a lot of digital input while their brains were still formation. I didn't want to turn them into little drug addicts, which is exactly the chemistry you're building when you put your children in front of the digital babysitter called the iPad all the time. So I was kind of like, I know that, when they go to school, it's quintessential, this stuff. It's always with them. And when they go to school, they're going to be on iPads and computers and touchscreens and who knows what other crazy technology they're going to have. But I decided I'm not giving it to them. You should see two of them are on the front row and they're just looking at me going, you're the meanest dad. You've still been the meanest dad ever. And so what happened is they developed an earnestness for something they didn't have. An earnestness. And so I had an iPad. I had 2 iPads, 3 over time for work-related purposes, girls. And whenever I was on my iPad, they would want to spy over my shoulder at what I was doing. Oh, Dad's typing a document. Oh, wow. Dad's got 2 followers on Instagram. And one is my mum and one is my nana. Oh, wow. Dad's got Facebook, and they would just earnestly look at it, and they would always be gazing over your shoulder. Then they would earnestly ask for one, Dad, can I please get an iPad? Can I please get an iPod? Can I please get an iPhone? It sort of changed over time depending on the sophistication of the available technology and the exposure of the child. So I came up with a solution because I couldn't be a mean father depriving them forever, although if I could have my way, they'd be little Amish girls in the hills of Pennsylvania churning butter and growing their leg hair long. Away from the dangers of this world. But I can't do that, so I have to let them live. In this world. So we came up with an agreement in our house. You like that, girls? You sure? Growing your leg hair? Dad, can I please use mascara? Sure, on your legs. We came up with an idea, and the idea was, sure, you can have an iPad. You just got to buy it yourself. Hear that, girls? That's everyone in the church going, what a mean father. The children have been raised in a household of deprivation. So what happened is, because they really wanted that iPad, every single one of my children, or whatever iDevice it was, it changed depending on the going model at the time, but every single one of those children found ways to get money, some legal, some otherwise. No, just kidding. Every single one of those children found a way to generate resources to buy their own iPad. And then we had a couple of other rules. If you break it, it gets taken away. And you'll never get another one. But I paid for it. Yeah, but I'm the parent of the house. I get to do whatever I want. That's how this works. And all the parents said, Amen. Who just loves torturing their children? A couple of really enthusiastic hand waves there. Not from the kids, though. So the first one was, if you break it, it gets taken away, you don't get it again. The second one was, there are rules. There are rules around how you're allowed to use it. You're just not allowed to become a 24/7 screen addict. You're not allowed to look at inappropriate material. You're not allowed to bypass the parental locks. You're not allowed to access stuff outside of the hours set when you're allowed to access it. You're not allowed to access stuff we don't want you to access. And so they were put in a constricted usage plan. So here's the three things that happened. Number one, they found incredible ways to save money. Number two, we have never had a broken iDevice in our house. Because if you break it, it gets taken away and you'll never get another one. So there's a little tip for some of the parents that are always replacing iPads that get dropped in the bath. Don't give it to them easy. Now, of course, why am I telling you this? I'm not just telling you this so you can pray for my children more, although you probably should. They've got a really horrible father. But I'm telling you this because what it helped me realize was it helped me see just the type of earnestness a human being is capable of. My youngest one, this is going to cost me $5, Lily, because I'm going to talk about you. My youngest one. The one we adopted because her real family, the tribe of monkeys, didn't want her. She wasn't even good enough for the monkeys. And we found her in a box and we brought her home. And now what were we saying? Lil, what were we saying about you before I got off track? When Lily she decided she wanted to buy an iPad. And why she decided she wanted to buy an iPad is because her sister had washed a lot of cars, baked a lot of stuff, conned a lot of relatives, and finally saved money and bought herself an iPad. Now, Lily was so earnest to get an iPad that her sister, one who cannot be named, decided to charge her $20 to look over her shoulder and watch her play on the iPad. Now, Lily at the time, help me out, Danielle, because my memory's shady. How old would Lily have been at the time? Before school? 7 years old. 7 years old. I mean, in some countries, you're ready for a career at that age. But not Lily. Lily's sister made her sign a contract that she had drawn up that said, I promise to pay my sister $20 if she lets me look over her shoulder and watch her play on her iPad. That's some earnestness, isn't it? For a little person. So we decided maybe there's a better way for you to invest your $20, Lily. And we also educated the other one about child exploitation laws in the Commonwealth of Australia. But it showed me just what earnestness really is when the kids come in with hope in their eyes. And I gave them almost zero money because I didn't really care. You know, part of the reason for setting the yardstick so high was I didn't care if they didn't have it till they went to school. Learn it when you go to school. Why do I care? I don't want you to become little digital addicts right now. I want you to go out and eat dirt and put leaves in your hair and kick boys and all that sort of good stuff that you're supposed to be doing as a little girl. But then I realised just how earnest they were. They would look at you with hope in their eyes. And one of the first signs of earnestness is asking, isn't it? Dad, can I please have an iPad? No. Dad, can I please have it? No. Dad, can I please? No. McDonald's understand this as part of their marketing stratagem. It's called pester power. The power of a nagging child. The power of a nagging child. Well, asking, let's not say nagging. In our house, we don't say nagging. We say, Danielle's just reminding me. Just reminding me, hey, Danielle, just being a little extra helpful. Asking, it's a sign of earnestness, and earnest people ask and ask and ask and ask, don't they? They sure do if you've ever had kids that wanted to go to Macca's, or kids that wanted to get a new little something, kids that want to go to the beach while you're on holidays there and you just want to sleep in the aircon, because this year you could only go to Darwin, where you'll get eaten by a crocodile if you swim at the beach. So you want to say, but those kids will just stay at you and at you and at you, won't they? Can we please go to the beach, Dad? Can we please go to the beach, Dad? Can we please go to the beach? Earnestness. The first sign of earnestness is asking. And Jesus told some stories about asking. One of the things he first of all said is that if you ask, it will be given to you. But you've got to keep on asking. And if you seek, you will find. But man, you've got to keep on seeking. And if you knock, the door will be open to you. But man, you've got to keep knocking. In the Greek language that the New Testament was written in, of course, it's all said in one snazzy word using tenses, that knocking is not just knock once, but knocking is if you knock and keep on knocking, if you ask and keep on asking, if you seek and keep on seeking. This is in David's mind as he says, God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you. He's not saying he just prayed once. He's not saying he just maybe dropped into worship once. He's not saying that he went to a temple once or opened a scripture once. He's saying that his life could be characterized. We know this because of the tenses of the Hebrew word. Earnestly I seek you. It's in the perfect tense. You could interpret it this way from that ancient language. I have earnestly sought you in an ongoing way, very vigorously and very energetically. You can get all that from that one word group. I've earnestly sought you. I've earnestly sought you. And then he unpacks what that means to earnestly seek God. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there's no water. I thirst for you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. I find this such an interesting scripture because we live in a culture that has taught us to thirst for many things. Isn't that true? And we live in a culture that has taught us to long for things with all of our being. Now let me tell you something. If you thirst for the things our culture tells you to thirst for, and if you long for things with all your being the way our culture teaches you to long for things, do they meet your needs? Well, the social research says, actually, they don't. The last 100 years, is actually a bit less than that, has seen a tectonic shift and the emergence of a new cultural phenomenon in Western civilization. This is called consumerism. Consumerism was not even heard of as a social phenomenon until it was catalogued in the year 2007 by a social scientist called Simon Smart, who put it in for the first time in a worldview catalogue called The Spectator's Guide to Worldviews. And for the first time ever, consumerism was added to the way humans organise their lives and see the world. Consumerism. The Oxford Dictionary defines consumerism as the emphasis on or preoccupation with the acquisition of consumer goods. Wikipedia says it's a social and economic order that encourages the purchase of goods and services in ever greater amounts. Consumerism was predicted to emerge by an economist called Victor Lebow. And in 1955, he said, looking ahead, our enormous and productive economy demands that we will have to make consumption our way of life, and that we convert the buying and selling of goods into rituals, and we seek our spiritual satisfaction and our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burnt up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. Well, fast forward 45 years, because we now live in a Western civilization that is characterized predominantly by anthropologists as a worldview of consumerism. Clive Hamilton, in his 2005 book, talked about consumerism not as a convenient way of life in which we have access to cool stuff, but as a new term, a new disease. Have you heard of influenza? Well, our world now has a virus called affluenza. Affluenza. The disease of greed and materialism. The bloated and sluggish, unfulfilled feeling that results from efforts to keep up with the Joneses. An epidemic of stress, overwork, waste, indebtedness caused by a dogged pursuit of the Australian dream. An unsustainable addiction to economic growth and stuff. In the coming decade, social scientists are predicting that most of our income growth will be spent on consumer products and meeting a craving for needs that have yet to be created by advertisers. Our public concerns might be about health and the environment, but the anthropologists say our private spending patterns show that the majority of Australians feel we suffer from a chronic lack of stuff, and therefore we are getting more stuff all the time. It's not just Australia. You see this phenomenon all over the world, and indeed it's even driving development in the developing world. Countries like India becoming dumping grounds for all of our empty water bottles because we would rather drink from this than go to the tap. Countries like India concerned that when everybody in that nation sees TV shows where everybody has a couple of cars and everybody has a washing machine and a dryer, but there's not enough power or environmental space in India for everyone in the country, 1.7 billion people, to have the same amount of stuff. It's interesting, isn't it? US psychologist Tim Kasser says that materialistic values are both a symptom of an underlying security and a coping strategy taken on in an attempt to alleviate problems and satisfy needs. I want you to think about that. That materialistic values do two things. Number one, they're a symptom of an underlying insecurity. And two, they're a coping strategy we take on in an attempt to satisfy needs. The arguments and data show that successfully pursuing materialistic goals fails to increase your happiness. And when people and nations make progress in materialistic ambitions, they may experience an improvement of mood, but it is short-lived and superficial. And the Australian evidence points to the conclusion that the more materialistic we become, the more we try to cope with our insecurities, and the less contented we are. Consumerism is destructive on a number of levels, and if we had time, we'd talk about the environmental impact of it. But I want to talk to you today about the fact that it is personally destructive. The happiness myth of consumerism has been exposed by the social data. We have more money, bigger houses, more gadgets, more labour-saving devices now than ever before, but we have more divorce, more cancer, more suicide, more depression, more anxiety, and more conflict now than we have ever before. Eating disorders and body hate are associated with a culture of consumerism, and 40% of adolescents now even younger, starting at age 8 years old, reflect when they are interviewed that they hate the look of their bodies. Remember, directly associated with a culture of consumerism. Commentator Alain de Botton says that status anxiety is eating away at young people who are now disabled with anxiety before they've even started anything in their life with the question, what if I'm not successful enough? What if I'm not attractive enough? What if I'm not rich enough? What if I don't have the right brand name things? What if my career isn't prestigious enough? And so now the debilitating anxiety makes them do nothing as an avoidance strategy instead of get out there and engage in the big, wide world. Terrible, hey? Consumerism is personally harmful. You're less happy. You have more debt. You have diminishing returns. You are more disillusioned. And of course, it costs relationships and fragments families, doesn't it? Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verse 6 gives us timeless wisdom in the face of a consumer society, and it says this: better is one handful with some rest than two hands full of toil and chasing the wind. Proverbs 21 verse 20 says, the house of the wise stores up choice food, but the fool devours all that he has. Why I'm talking to you about this is because at the core of the social problem we have is our tendency, as Tim Kasser says, to meet our underlying insecurities and meet our deepest seated needs in the form of consumer behaviour. George Vallon is a psychologist, and he says he's a specialist in the area of hedonics, which is the science of happiness. And he says this: if you want to know what happiness is, don't ask your psychologist. Don't ask your psychiatrist. Because they spend all of their times dealing with why you're not happy, but they can't actually tell you how you could be happy. But they do know one thing. They do know one thing. So that's good, isn't it? Any psychologists or psychiatrists in the room, we still love you, but you can't make us happier. Not without drugs. They do know one thing, and this is what they know: that happiness is one of the very few things you can't have by chasing it. You can't have it by chasing it. In the science of hedonics, they know the more a person tries to be happy, the less happy they are. Anyone with a bad attitude just leaving the church right now because their dad didn't buy them an iPad? Our consumer society has seen an increase in mental illness, in self-harm, starting at very young ages. Now the new phenomenon of contagious mental illnesses, where they are represented in social and family clusters, not just individuals with an illness. And you can go to a doctor. I had someone recently come and see me, and they were very concerned. They went to the doctor and they said, man, I'm just tireder than I've normally been, and I've got less energy than I normally would, and I'm less motivation than I normally did. And within 3 minutes, the doctor had written them a prescription for antidepressant medication. The doctor said, well, you meet the diagnostic criterion according to the questionnaire for clinical depression. And the person walked away very stunned because they didn't think they were depressed. In fact, they were sort of thought, I don't know if I am depressed. And they came and they sat and they put the prescription for the medication on my desk, and they said, I don't know whether I should get this prescription filled or not. And by the way, I always say you should have a good consultation with mental health professionals and follow their advice. But in this case, he said, I don't know if I should fill this prescription or not. I'm worried I'm going to depend on this medication. So before I went and got the prescription filled, I want to check out a couple of things. So we began to have a conversation. Now, in today's world has seen the emergence of a new theory of health. It's called the biopsychosocial model. Most of the time, no criticism if you're a medical person in the place, but most of the time, the old school medical system really only deals with the biomedical problem. That if you have a problem, we will find something in the cells of your body that cause that problem, and we will fix it with pharmaceuticals. But the biopsychosocial model says, actually, we might look at your physical state of being and whether you need some medication there, but we would also look at your state of mind and the way you think and the way you engage your emotions and your thoughts and your attitudes and your behaviours. We'd look at that because that can actually have a massive impact on your health. That's the psycho element of it. And then there's the social element, which is, but we would also look at your environment. We'd also look at who you're hanging out with, what's going on in your family, are your needs met relationally? And we'd bring together these three areas, the biology and the psychology and the sociology of your life, if you like. And we'd look at all three of those areas, and then we'd say that perhaps we should put some effort into all of these different parts of your life for you to have an optimum state of well-being. Sounds like a great idea, huh? You don't think so? I'll just move on. Sometimes we have to take a step back from our secular world and its secular materialistic values. I hope you're blessed. I hope you're blessed financially, and I hope you can leave a legacy to the next generation. I hope your kids are blessed. I hope you're well sheltered and clothed and fed. So this is not a message about poverty. But this is what I know from the social research, that if you just get on the consumer bandwagon, you will be a person hungry, 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 and never fed. You'll be a person thirsty, 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 and never assuaged. That's what the social data says. And it's not just Christian people saying this. Clive Hamilton is not a Christian man, but wrote a whole book on what is wrong with Australian society because of this affluenza. the sickness of stuff. I want you to come back to Proverbs chapter 27, verse 7. Listen to what it says. The one who is full loathes honey from the comb, but to the hungry, even what is bitter tastes sweet. When our soul is empty, what is bitter tastes sweet. That's why a homeless man will eat from a rubbish bin, right? But when you've had mama's home cooking and you walk past that rubbish bin, you couldn't imagine why anybody would want to snack on that. Listen to what David says. Earnestly I seek you, God. I thirst for stuff, for status, for consumer goods. No, I thirst for you. See, David recognizes people are thirsty. My whole being longs for you in a dry and weary land where there's no water. David rightly, he's in a wilderness when he's writing this, so there's extra irony. But, David looks around the world and he says, this world is not a place that satisfies. This world is not a place that fills. This world is not a place that meets my deepest needs. But he's learned to take that thirst as a sign. Do you ever wonder how the first human ever discovered that water assuages your thirst? Think of the risk they took. What is that clear stuff? I don't know, but for some reason I want to drink it. Imagine if they did that with petrol instead. Thirst itself points to the existence of water. You could take a person and bring them up and they could have never seen or heard of water, but one day they'd be so thirsty they would instinctively see water and drink it, and it would be something that their DNA makes them do. Thirst points towards something. It points towards something that fixes the thirst. If you lived on Coca-Cola your whole life, what's weird is you'd never know you're thirsty and you'd slowly die of dehydration, but you'd never feel your thirst. Isn't that weird? In this passage, David is saying, God, I've learnt that I'm a thirsty person, but I've learnt where to direct that thirst. I've learnt what it is I thirst after, what it is I hunger for. He uses thirst and hunger in this passage. I've learnt that I have deep needs. I've learnt that I have deep appetites, but I've learnt where I should go to get them filled. Our culture is a world in crisis, learning where we should go to get our needs met. That man I was telling you about that went to the doctor, we began to have a conversation. And he noticed two things about his own life. Number one, it had been a long time since he'd really connected with God. Number two, he hated his job. We were having a conversation. I worked out, why aren't you connecting with God? Oh, I don't know. I just didn't think I could. And we began to talk about the gospel and the wonder of Jesus, and there in my office, for the first time in his whole life, he connected with Jesus. Said a simple prayer, God, wherever I'm going to, wherever I'm coming from today, I draw a line in the sand of my life and I turn to you. My answer is yes to the gospel message. And he, for the first time in his life, drank from the well of living water. How awesome is that? The second thing he did is he decided, I asked him a question. If you hate your job, do you reckon you could get a different one? Oh, I never thought of that. How many people know sometimes we just need a friend to ask us a couple of questions, eh? Reckon you could get a new one? Oh, I've never thought of that. Okay, well, I'm not telling you what to do. Have a think. Have a pray now that you've got someone to pray to. And so he went away. And he noticed two things which he talked to me about before 4 days' time. About 4 days, maybe. The first one was he decided he was going to try to get another job. And he did up his CV, sent out some applications. And just doing that, he found that he felt happier than he'd felt for ages. You know why? This is the biopsychosocial model. Because actually, it wasn't just that his brain had decided to stop producing the right chemicals and make him depressed. He was depressed because he was in a depressing job that he hated, that he didn't see any purpose in, that he didn't feel like he was meeting any needs in the universe, felt pointless and purposeless. So he decided, I might have to do something else with my primary time engagement. And just doing that, made him happier than he'd been for a long time. And he said at the end of the week, I now recognize that having God in my life has been something that I've listened to his words, thirsted for my whole life without knowing. Pretty amazing, hey? David says, God, you're my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there's no water. But then listen to what he says. I've seen you in the sanctuary. I've beheld your power and your glory because your love is better than life. See, we live in a world that wants to convince us that not having the latest goods is worse than death. Not having more money, not having more status, not having the right body type, not having the right body shape, not having unbridled sexual expression and a romance like Harvey Specter of Suits, that somehow that's all worse than death. It's a fate worse than death not to be a consumer in our society. But David says, if you flip that, God, your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise your name as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. Then listen to what he says in verse 5. I seek God. I hunger after God. I thirst after God. I seek him in the sanctuary. I behold his power and his glory with the people of God. I treat his love like it's something that's better than life itself. I praise him. I glorify him with my lips. I lift up my hands. Listen to verse 5. I will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. I will be satisfied. Everybody say the word satisfied. Isn't there something satisfying about saying satisfied? There's an inherent amount of satisfaction in that word, isn't there? Just look at me and go, satisfaction. How many people are thinking what I'm thinking? That Mick Jagger said he couldn't get none because he wasn't in here with you today. David said, I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. In the ancient language this was originally written in the Hebrew, it actually says, I will be satisfied with the choicest fat. How many people are claiming that promise from God? And it comes from the Hebrew culture where the best parts of the lamb were the nice roasted meaty bits with a nice layer of caramelized encrusted fat on the outside. Who knows what I'm talking about? Who loves their char grilling at home? I took up smoking a few months ago. Meat though, not other stuff. And David says, my soul will be satisfied like I just ate some of that lamb with the fat on it. You know how good it feels? Danielle, she worries all the time about me being over 40 and this little belly that I've got growing that makes my children nominate me for Santa in the school play. And so she's trying to cut the fat in my diet a little. Rabbit food all the time. It's called the paleo diet. Bowl of misery and rabbit food for breakfast. And so I really relate to this idea of David, of like the satisfaction that comes from a good fat meal, from a nice steak with the fat on it, lamb with the fat on it. If you're a vegan, tofu with nothing, actually. We'll move on. I wonder if you'd stand on your feet. We're going to close, but we're just going to close by doing this. We're going to close by praying. We're going to close with a song, actually, since the band are around, yes. Thank you, Glenda. That was such soul-comforting music that you were playing then. We're going to finish with a song, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to think about what I've said, and I want you to worship God, and finish this with one song that says, God, in this song, I'm hungering and thirsting for you in a world that makes me hunger and thirst for all sorts of stuff. I'm seeking you earnestly in a world that makes me seek all sorts of other stuff. And who could blame you? It's broadcasting its message to you all the time. So today we're going to go as God seekers. Who's with me? We're going to live this week as just turning up the volume a little bit on the way we seek God in Jesus' name. Who's with me? Some of us, that means maybe we're going to make a decision to just pray a little bit more. Maybe we're going to worship a little bit more. Maybe we're going to study the word a little bit more. Maybe it's just sit with a friend and have a cup of tea and talk about Jesus. Feast on Jesus a little bit. Is that okay? But what it means for now is we're going to sing and And let's fill this place with worship to Jesus. And then Pastor Mess is going to come and close the service. Thank you for joining us. We love you. God bless you.